It's the pain you don't always see, a silent struggle, a moment of despair that can feel like forever. In this deeply important episode of Rise and Thrive, we open the conversation around suicide and suicide ideation with those who have lost loved ones and with professionals working every day to prevent such tragedies. Together, we explore the warning signs, the impact on families and communities, and most importantly, the pathways to healing, support, and hope. This episode is not just a discussion, it's a reminder you are not alone. There is help, there is hope, there is life beyond the darkness. Rise and Thrive is proud to present this episode in honor of those we've lost and in support of those still fighting. This episode is brought to you by our title sponsor, Brain Armor. Visit brainarmor.com and use the code RISE and Thrive to receive 50% off your order.
Welcome once again to Rise and Thrive. Losing someone to suicide is probably the most difficult thing that you will ever experience. Today, we're talking about a topic that is as challenging as it is necessary. That's suicide and suicide ideation. Now, having these conversations may make you a little uncomfortable, but it literally could be the difference between life and death.
Despite the immeasurable grief, there's a deep desire to help others who have faced similar losses.
Thank you, Michael. Now let's introduce you to our panelists for this very important discussion. Lisa Hartt, Natalie Pierre, and Elizabeth Gavin. Also with us today is the Executive Director of CMHA, Rashad Vahad, who actually I should say is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer. I kind of gave you a bigger title.
I got a promotion. I loved it.
Yeah. Bigger title, more money, bringing us valuable experience in the field of mental health. First of all, thanks for being here as always. You've worked tirelessly in this field for years, dealing with suicide and suicide ideation. So let's start off with the obvious question. What are some of the signs that come up when it comes to suicide or suicide ideation, and how can people intervene?
Okay. I think one of the biggest pieces that comes up for families and for individuals is that people are often struggling with some kind of mental health issue. And it could be quite broad. Things from feelings of depression or anxiety, people encountering a change in their mood levels, people struggling with sleep, individuals feeling like things that brought them joy and a sense of flow before no longer do, and they begin to lose a sense of hope and anticipation in the future. I do want to point out that what precedes oftentimes suicidal ideation, thinking about death frequently, what often precedes it is changes in the spaces that are social, emotional, or behavioral. And so it's not one simple formula, but changes that families and individuals often notice. The person is different than they were previously. And perhaps most specifically when it comes to the space of people who have attempted to take their lives or who have taken their lives, what's the most challenging pieces for families to understand is the role of impulsivity in people who take their lives. Oftentimes families are watching closely, they're intervening, therapists are involved, but there's a moment in which sometimes we just can't be present, and people make a quick decision to end their pain and their suffering, and that's one of the pieces that keeps us awake, both as parents as well as practitioners. Is how do we take a moment where somebody's feeling very isolated and be positioned quickly in the event that they're able to reach out and that we can intervene.
Lisa Hartt, talented songwriter. You've worked with, I'm so envious, you work with Anne Murray, you've worked with Kenny Devise, you've worked with Juno Award. But from all that comes your story, and you wrote a very powerful song to deal with something that happened in your life. So first of all, thanks for joining us and kind of tell us your story.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, everybody. I didn't think I'd feel like that. Like, it's so emotional to even think about it. Christopher is my brother, my little brother. He was my ally. He adored me, and I adored him, and I took care of him most of his life, even up until the point where he died. Now, this was a long, what I call a long suicide. He was diagnosed and put into the Douglas Hospital in Montreal, and I don't know if you know that hospital, but it was in those days, in the 60s, very Victorian-based, very shock treatments, all kinds of brutal treatments in those days, which they thought were helping the patients. And he was in there for a long time, came out, they put him on meds. For his whole life, from age 17 till 63 when he died of direct causes to the mental illness, he was on medications, off and on the medications, on the street, in jail. So many times I had to rescue my parents, because what would happen was some of the medications would create this violence in him, and he'd be at home. My parents took care of him as best they could most of their lives. They dedicated their life to trying to make sure that Christopher could have a life. He never had a family. He had girlfriends for sure, because he was gorgeous. He was absolutely a gorgeous human being. He was an actor, a writer, a historian, but he was unable to have a life. So on and on it went, fixing the burnt apartments, trying to get a new apartment, fixing the floods, back into hospital, calling the cops. It was so difficult. And yet he was when he was lucid and when he was in his right mind and when he was in the programs, he seemed to be doing very well. But then he would say to me, Lisa, no one understands how I feel. They cannot get how I feel. I cannot live in this body. I can't be on this planet anymore. I have to go. So he tried to kill himself 4 times. 4 times he was found in time, and 4 times he woke up and was furious. So the agony from age 17 to 63 for the whole family, because it affected all of us. When I was on the road, I couldn't take care of him. My other brother, Peter, would take care of him. We just all went through it, my little sister as well. When he finally died of an overdose of medication, he was in a halfway house here in Toronto. My parents had both died. We had to move him out of the family home. We had to sell the family home. And at that point, he just couldn't bear to live anymore. So he had been dragged from Montreal to Toronto, and we did the best we could. But you know, when everybody has families and everybody's busy, just like Rashad was saying, you cannot keep your eye on it every moment, you know? So yeah, I feel to this day that I could have done more. And I always feel that, and I always forgive myself because I know I did the best I could. But that, as a survivor, that's how I feel.
You wrote a song, and we'll get to our guest in a moment. And I think the title of the song says everything, because I'm sure you heard this at funerals and afterwards. And the name of the song is Don't Tell Me How I Feel.
Running through the fields of summer in the golden sun, I had a kind of warning of the girl I'd become. That's the only girl you know, the shell that you see here. And now you're waiting for the day when I just disappear. When I was just a girl, I loved my family and my dog.
How cathartic was it for you writing that song?
It was everything. I was writing a journey. My journey is of recovering from alcoholism. On March the 10th of 2025, I am 42 years clean and sober. And I always wanted my program to work for my brother because it's a design for living, but that's not what he was suffering from. So it never worked. So I thought, I'll write the story of his life from his point of view. And that's something he used to say to me, don't tell me how I feel. So I wrote his beautiful story about him being a top seed tennis player, about his acting. And the chorus is, don't tell me how I feel. You don't even know who I am. Don't tell me how I feel. And it just goes on that, you know, if you could walk in my shoes, you might understand.
Elizabeth, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Your story is like everybody else's, very upsetting. You lost your daughter in and around COVID. And I know that there's a lot of stories of damage that COVID did to. My line is, everybody suffered from something during COVID. Everybody was upset, whether they wanted to admit it or not. COVID did a number on all of us. Unfortunately, your situation, it went a little further. Share your daughter's story with us.
So I lost my daughter on her 20th birthday. She took her life. She was a second-year university student at the University of Guelph. And when you say that others were in a similar boat, that same week, another second-year university student at the University of Guelph also took her life. And another 20-year-old named Surya took her life as well. This was in January 2022. So this was during the fourth lockdown that was imposed upon people in Ontario. And I know 3 young people who were all around this in the same phase of life as my daughter. And so these were the kids that were in grade 12 when the first school closures happened and the lockdowns happened in March 2020. These girls took their lives in January 22. So what happened in between there was these grade 12s didn't get a prom, they didn't get a high school graduation, they couldn't get summer jobs, everything was locked down and shuttered. In September 2020, these girls would have started university or college, and they had no frosh week, they had no residences, they had none of the rites of passage that people our age, you know, have lived with. And the first year university students in 2020 all learned online. They were isolated in their rooms and wherever they were, not on campus. Many of the schools did not have anyone on campus. And so, you know, I mean, we saw the signs. Speaking of seeing the signs, I mean, we knew the signs. McMaster University came out with a study in May 2020 that suicides were up 300% in youth. Anorexia was up 90%. Drug use was up 200%. So this was known in May 2020. The WHO in 2019 advised against lockdowns under any circumstances, yet it happened. So, you know, I think with suicide, you're always asking yourself, why? And I'll ask that forever, although I know the answer as to why my daughter took her life, and Grace and Surya at that time in January 2022, and it had everything to do with isolation and lockdowns in our province.
Ontario's 28-day lockdown. The province's tough measures to get COVID-19 numbers down.
We will see, in all likelihood, a moment of historic difficulty in the month of January.
The circuit breaker and its impact on schools and businesses.
Wow, powerful story, Elizabeth. Natalie, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Share your story about your son.
So my son, Michael Pierre, took his own life in 2017. He was 17 years old, a senior in high school, grade 12 student. Anyone looking at Mike would have seen a normal teenager. The night before he died, he went to a school dance, The day he died, he and I went on a university tour. We were talking about how he would store his hockey equipment in his residence. He worked a couple of hours at his part-time job, and then he hung out with some friends that night. Anyone seeing Mike would have thought he was just a normal teenage kid heading on his way to adulthood. What we didn't know is 3 weeks before, he had posted a message on social media talking about some of his feelings. It was on a secret social media account that we weren't aware of. The other thing that I would share is, just a few months before my son took his life, I lost a brother-in-law to suicide as well. And what I didn't know at the time was that that's not unusual. When there is one suicide in a family, there is often another one. And I thought, how is it that I didn't know that? And I just started to thinking about how much we know and how much we don't know about mental health, and led to future decisions and career paths to advocate to make changes.
Michael, you want to weigh?
Yeah, I mean, listen, these are all very heartfelt stories, and I appreciate it, how all of you are sharing this. Excuse me. It's amazing how everyone has a different story and a different experience, yet it's still the same. It's still the same pain. It's still the same hurt. And, you know, luckily for me, I haven't had to experience what you guys have experienced. And, you know, I tip my hat to you as survivors, especially when it's a loved one, a child, a brother, you know, a daughter, friends of your kids. It's just, it's mind-boggling.
Rashad, you've heard the stories, and I saw you taking notes. Was there one common thread in what our guests said about either what they were feeling or what their loved ones were feeling before? What kind of jumped out at you about all these stories in some sort of commonality?
Just a couple of things that really stood out for me, and you know, hearing Natalie talk about her son, you know, I think we have a view of what somebody looks like before they take their life, and we have a conception about what that is, that because we have that view, it actually sets people up at risk. And that you might have somebody in your life who, you know, is engaged in activity, has a future, is planning for a future, but there might be pieces of them that they really are struggling with. And we're always searching to, you know, try to find out what that is, to be present at that moment as parents and as loved ones. But I also think the flip side of that is that when that moment happens, we're left with the seed of wondering what happened when we weren't there. And to be incredibly, like, just honest, that might be such a private moment that only existed truly in that person's mind, in a way that is, you know, we could try to understand it and try to get to it as close to it as possible, but the real challenge is that we're never actually there seeing what was happening in their mind at that moment in which it happened.
I wanted to ask our guest panelists this question, because I know that this is an absolutely horrendous topic, and I know it may make some people feel uncomfortable, but it's something we have to talk about. How did you get through it? Because not only did you lose your brother, you're also dealing with some other family issues as well. So you've had a lot on your plate for the last few years. How do you get through it day by day? How do you, if you will, rise and hopefully thrive?
Oh, well, that's a great question. And to be honest, I only live in one day. So I always coach myself, and I've had coaching. I went to some grief workshops that really helped me, but I also follow a program that tells me you only have today. The future is what it is. The past is gone. You just have today. What was it that these beautiful people that are gone from your life now, what was it that they gave you to make you the character you are today, that me? And can we build on that? And what can I say? What can I do to pay it forward, to be of service? And the only way I know how to speak is through music. So whatever gift I was given, I'm really trying now, in this latter part of my life, in the third act, is to pay it forward. Because I can't see that everybody, I will not be able to go and talk to somebody who had my exact experience. Nobody had the same experience. But as Michael said, we all feel the same pain. It's a human condition. So what can we do to alleviate pain for the survivors and also to create warnings or cautionary tales? So my songs are now what I call parables and cautionary tales. Okay, this can happen. This can happen. What do I look for? How do I put it in a poetic form so that it's not so aggressive? You know, that's really the way I got through it.
Elizabeth, I'm not a psychologist, obviously not, but I'm looking at you and I see a raft of emotions, obviously still raw, but I see a lot of anger. How do you deal with not necessarily the situation of what happened to your daughter, but how it happened? How do you deal with the anger that I'm sure wells up on occasion thinking, why?
Well, so getting through the initial year, just back to your original question, how do you get through it? So the first year, I'd have to say you are in a complete and total fog, and it's very, very difficult. I liken it to going through an army obstacle course, and you're slogging through the mud under some barbed wire, and it's a fog, and it's really awful. And then something happens and you turn a corner, whatever it is, it's different for everybody. One of the things that helped me was an organization called Heartache to Hope. And Flavia, who runs this amazing group, specializes in dealing with families and helping families and people who have been touched by suicide. So I found group therapy was an excellent way to cope and talk to other people who were going through the same thing. Of course, I kept in touch with the parents of the girls who died by suicide the same week as my daughter, and because we are at exactly the same point in what they call a grief journey. So I found that very supportive. About the anger part, I guess if I could touch on that for a minute. I don't know how to answer that, Ted, except that when I look at the stats that came out and when they did and when the evidence was there, my anger is towards the people who made the decisions to lock us down. And I just want to know why they did that to us. They affected everybody in this province, in this country. And they had the evidence. In May 2020, McMaster Children's Hospital gave the medical roundtable in Ontario the evidence that people were suffering horribly. At the end of 2020, Stats Canada knew that 55% of people were not having good mental health. In January 2021, the Council of Mental Health, the Council of Ontario Medical Officers of Health wrote a letter to Stephen Lecce and Christine Elliott telling them that the harms of prolonged school closures they should be the last to close and the first to open, and that the harms far outweigh the risks, and yet the school closures continued. So if I seem angry, it's because I just want to know why they didn't. Why did our governments, the provincial government, The federal government, why did they not heed the advice of all these professionals? I'm not a psychologist either. I can't tell you why people do it. I just know that people were suffering and they knew and they kept the closures on. So how do I deal with the anger? I put it towards helping other kids who were ousted from school. I worked on a project with a wonderful man, Dr. Irvin Student, who's written a book called Never Close the Schools Again, Ever. He found that there's 115,000 kids in Ontario alone who were ousted from school. These are kids that will be uneducated or undereducated. This is our workforce of tomorrow, and all of their families will be affected. So I was so happy to see Natalie Pierre's announcement in 2024. Natalie was not in government at the time of the death of my daughter and these other
Which we should
people.
probably emphasize.
Yes, I want to
Thank you
emphasize
for saying that.
So Natalie's work introducing financial supports to help mental health struggles with kids in school was so welcome. I watched the press conference that day and I was like, I know it's such a personal thing. But the other thing, a solution, if I could suggest, is that the province make sure that they never close the schools again, ever, ever, ever. And they put funding towards re-engaging kids who have been ousted from school. The Peel School Board dropped their department, re-engagement, reaching out to kids. They have the lists. They know the kids that have fallen through the cracks, and we have to pull them back into the education system, which is what the work that we did with Irvin.
Natalie, we didn't, obviously we wanted to make the point that you were not in government when that decision during COVID was made, so we'll clear that up right now. As a parent, going through what you've gone through, the horrible story like everybody else, and you keep busy, obviously, representing your constituents on a daily basis, how do you get through any emotions that I'm sure bubble to the surface, sometimes more prominent than others?
So not a simple question and not a simple answer. I would say similar to Elizabeth, I too participated in therapy through a group called Heartache to Hope, which is a suicide loss survivors group. I would say that it took me probably more than a year to figure out how to continue and how to live and still find joy in life, and to understand that you can have moments of hope and have moments of joy and still experience sadness, and that they're not mutually exclusive in my life anymore. Before Mike died, I always thought you were either, happy or you were sad, and I think what I've learned is that you can be a bit of both at the same time. I'm not angry. I'm sad for the choice that my son made. I wish it was different. And I just chose to take my energy and to advocate for change and to advocate. I started looking locally in Halton region, which is where my son went to school, and then ended up running for office to advocate for changes for mental health education and mental health supports in the province of Ontario.
That's sorry, Ted, that's great, Natalie. And with your advocacy at the provincial level, the government has done a lot since you decided to run for office. Do you want to explain a few things that the government has done since you've been in office and advocating for mental health?
Sure, thank you. So just very briefly, I would touch on mental health literacy is now part of the school curriculum and a required area of study for graduation. So now grade 7 and 8 students will learn about mental health education talk about signs, symptoms, learn to recognize their own feelings, and learn to recognize feelings of other people as well. So if, maybe they're at home and, they see their mother or a sibling or a friend who's suffering, and to understand where they can go to find supports. Also in the high school curriculum in the grade 10 civics and careers course, which is a mandatory course of learning in high school, there is now a module on mental health as well.
Fantastic.
And then in the Ministry of Colleges and Universities, we introduced, Navita Sukdeo from my office and I spent the better part of a year touring colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes, mostly in person, sometimes online, to better understand the supports and services that are available in post-secondary. And then through Bill 166, Strengthening Students and Accountability Act, I think it's called, making sure that publicly funded post-secondary institutions have a framework and a baseline of services so that students, no matter where they go to study in the province, have access to mental health supports and mental health services. And then finally, I would add, most recently, in November of 2024, so just a few months ago, the announcement of the redevelopment of the Mental Health and Addictions Unit at Joseph Brant Hospital in Burlington. And so thank you to you, Michael, for your support in making that a reality. So the Mental Health and Addictions Unit at our hospital is quite antiquated, but that is now changing. And so thank you to Michael and your wife, Laura, for your incredible, generous donation that will change the landscape of mental health and addictions care in Burlington and surrounding areas.
Just before we wrap up, and this has been absolutely powerful, very visceral, very emotional, it's the chance for all of you to give the advice to parents, to the kids that are watching, maybe with their parents. Words of advice that you could give to everybody watching. Lisa.
Make sure that you're an advocate for your child or spouse or whoever is affected, and be there for the delivery of medications and the trials and the tribulations and the side effects of medications. My brother suffered immeasurably for no reason for years because of that, and was unable to have a real life because of that. And it eventually culminated in terminating his life. And also to join affiliations that bring joy. For instance, if you have an artist in your home, I'm an advocate now and an ambassador for a group called Birdsong, which is a foundation that finds funding for mentally ill, challenged young musicians and artists. And we find funding so that they can create their projects and have hands-on and be able to talk to people feelings through music. But that's my main thing, is be an advocate, be there, ask questions. Don't let it go, don't let those things go by you, because that's where I feel really bad too, is that I didn't have my hands on that. It was so early in the game in the 60s, when it all started, so. Thanks.
Elizabeth, words of advice.
I would say, for parents of younger children who are in grades 7 and 8 and 10 who are getting the mental health education in schools, talk to them about what they're learning and find out what they're learning and talk to them and about how they feel. That's something a bit new for parents, so it's an excellent opportunity to broach the subject.
Natalie, words of advice to parents, kids, teenagers.
So I hesitate to give advice. What I would say for anyone who is suffering, just understand that you're not alone. Understand that there are resources available to you. If you are feeling or having thoughts of suicide ideation, reach out to someone, talk to someone. Maybe that's a teacher or a neighbor or a librarian or a friend or a parent. And just understand that you're not alone. Mental health affects 50% of Canadians at some point in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think specifically for my son, I would say he chose a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I would say life is full of ups and downs, that this may be a chapter in your life, but it's not the whole book. And
It's just a path.
it's, just reach out, talk to someone, talk to a professional. We have a lot of work to do, I think, to eliminate stigma. But I think we've made progress. I am hopeful we are on the right path.
And finally, Rashad, who has been, thank you for everything you and your organization here at CMHA Halton does. I know that there is something that you wanted to mention specifically about help that people can get tied in with CMHA and a new line that people can call for assistance.
100%. And I just want to go back to a point that in some ways all of my esteemed panelists have talked about today, is that when young people or adults are experiencing mental health issues, what many people don't understand is that it changes the way you think. And the way mental health speaks to you is that it tells you on a daily basis that you're isolated. It tells you on a daily basis that even if you take action, it will not be as helpful and it will not get you to where you want to go. And this is a critical ingredient that we need to understand, because the first thing that we do is we try to perforate that bubble and show them that there might be a longer timeline that you don't imagine as a young person. We might allow them to show that when they share, the world doesn't collapse and they're not judged in such a way that they can't recover from it ever. And perhaps it might allow us to kind of introduce the beginning of a connection to a relationship or a different way of thinking that might just put them on the start of a path to something different. People who are outside of experiencing a mental health issue assumes that it speaks to them the way my brain speaks to myself. And it begins to quietly change the way in which your brain talks to yourself, so that these drastic decisions begin to feel normal, and they're not. We often ask the question, what changes in a person's life? Do they lose their social connection first and then the mental health issues happen? Or did the mental health issue begin to isolate them and then they lose their social connection? And it's a little bit of both. And that's why when we come in as professionals and we're working with families and individuals, we try to tackle both of those things. And to my earlier point, we also just try to be available, so that if somebody's struggling with mental health issues, if there's a critical moment where they're struggling with the life and death issues, we want to increase the possibility that they have somewhere to reach out. The literacy is critical. The literacy that all of you have spoken about today, the literacy that we bring to families, that we bring to schools, that we train people. And we have a program here called Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, where we train people to look for the little hooks that people throw out socially, so we can notice and hear differently and perhaps take them by the hand from where they are and to connect them to where they might need to be. But the second piece that we've introduced in the last year across Canada is the introduction of the 988 crisis helpline. It's one number. You can call it 24/7 across the country, and you will be met with trained professionals in every province and territory of this country, who are trained in a consistent way to be there in your moment of distress. And what we are really finding is that it is working. We're getting a lot of phone calls, and the quality of the calls we're getting are more complicated and more distressful than what we have ever received here in Halton, in our region of Halton. A good suicide intervention strategy, and every single panel member spoke to it. All of you, in very brave and ways in which many of us struggle to understand, have taken deep pain and transformed it into different types of action that have allowed you to channel that energy. And I think you've helped us to understand that in that moment when you first lose somebody to suicide, it feels like you've jumped into a river of pain. And perhaps if you're lucky, over time it feels like it's a puddle that you can jump in and jump out of, and to have different compartments. But not everybody gets there. And so we don't want to judge people who don't get into that place, but we certainly want to point out that really, and I mean this generally, our brave panelists have pointed out possibilities for what families might be able to do if they're ever faced with this.
My thanks to our panel today.
It actually piggybacks a little bit off what Rashad was saying, and for parents, the advice I would give them is for kids that are under 25, 26, just remember that they went through 2 years of something that we never went through. And it's there was a lot. There was learning loss. There was maturation loss. There was emotional loss. And to go a little bit easier on them, maybe do that a little bit extra for them because they went through something that none of us had ever gone through. So give them a little bit of leeway if they can.
You know, it's amazing how these conversations are creating a movement. It's something that needs to be talked about. We can't be silent anymore. We need to talk about it so we can change the course of someone's life. Thank you to all of our guests for being here today and showing the courage in sharing your stories. It's a very difficult topic, but one that needs to be shared. Let's keep the conversation going so we can help those who need it.
Thanks everybody for your stories and your bravery. And thank you for joining us. And remember, as you listen and watch this, you are not alone. We're all in this together. I'm Tad Michaels. Thanks for joining us. See you next time on Rise and Thrive.
A big thank you to all our sponsors and a special shout out to our title sponsor, Brain Armor. Don't forget to visit brainarmor.com and use the promo code RISE and THRIVE for an exclusive 50% discount on your purchase. For more updates and to stay in the loop on upcoming episodes, be sure to subscribe to our website at riseandthrivepodcast.ca. We're grateful for your support and look forward to sharing more inspiring stories with you. Until next time, keep thriving.